Sarah Jenkins never imagined the waterlogged parcel of land her grandmother left her would change her life forever. The small-town nurse who had spent her career caring for others was about to receive the ultimate gift of good fortune, but not before facing the skepticism, ridicule, and greed of those around her. When her beloved grandmother passed away last winter, Sarah inherited what everyone in her family called the worthless Swampland, 40 acres of seemingly useless wetland that her grandmother had purchased decades ago. As a dedicated trauma nurse working double shifts to pay off her student loans, Sarah initially viewed the inheritance as just another responsibility rather than the blessing it would become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's relationship with her grandmother had always been special. Margaret Jenkins had raised Sarah after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 8 years old. Growing up in the modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Millfield, Sarah learned the values of hard work, compassion, and perseverance from the woman who sacrificed everything to give her a stable home. Margaret had worked as a school secretary for 40 years, saving every extra penny she could. The Swampland purchase had been her one inexplicable splurge, a decision that had become something of a family joke over holiday dinners. Your grandmother and her swamp dreams, Sarah's Uncle Thomas would laugh, glass of whiskey in hand. That woman could have put a down payment on a vacation home, but instead, she bought a mosquito breeding ground. When the lawyer read Margaret's will, leaving her modest savings to be split among various family members and the infamous Swampland solely to Sarah, there were snickers around the conference table. Uncle Thomas had rolled his eyes dramatically, while her cousins exchanged knowing glances. Only her cousin Emma offered a sympathetic smile. "Better you than me," Thomas had said afterward in the parking lot. Property taxes on useless land, just what a nurse with student loans needs. Sarah had nodded politely, but something about her grandmother's decision felt intentional. Margaret Jenkins had never done anything without careful consideration. There had to be a reason she wanted Sarah to have that particular piece of land. The question haunted Sarah as she drove home from the reading of the will, her grandmother's old leather-bound journal on the passenger seat beside her. That evening, wrapped in her grandmother's handmade quilt, Sarah opened the journal for the first time. The faded blue book contained years of Margaret's thoughts, daily observations, and dreams. As Sarah flipped through the yellowing pages, she noticed recurring mentions of the investment and my legacy to Sarah. On the final page, in her grandmother's increasingly shaky handwriting, was a note addressed directly to her. "My dearest Sarah, by the time you read this, I will be gone. The land is not what it seems. Look beneath the surface. I couldn't pursue it in my lifetime, but you have the strength I never had. Don't let anyone take it from you. Love always, Grandma Margaret." Sarah read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. What did her grandmother mean? What was beneath the surface? The cryptic message left her with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Her grandmother believed the Swampland had value, and she had specifically wanted Sarah to discover it. The following weekend, Sarah drove out to inspect her inheritance for the first time. The property was located about 40 miles outside of town, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that became increasingly muddy as she approached. When she finally reached the coordinates specified in the property documents, she parked her 10-year-old Honda Civic and stepped out into ankle-deep water. The landscape before her was not encouraging. Tangled cypress trees emerged from murky water, their knobby knees protruding like ancient creatures from the depths. Thick clouds of insects swarmed in the humid air, and somewhere in the distance, a bullfrog croaked its territorial warning. Sarah swatted at mosquitoes as she tried to make sense of what her grandmother had seen in this seemingly inhospitable place. "Great," she muttered to herself, slapping at another mosquito on her neck. 40 acres of prime swampland. Just what every girl dreams of inheriting. Sarah waded carefully through the shallow water, scanning the area for anything unusual. The mud sucked at her boots with each step, making progress slow and laborious. After an hour of exploration that yielded nothing but soggy socks and several mosquito bites, she was ready to give up. Maybe her family was right. Maybe her grandmother had made a foolish investment. As she turned to head back to her car, something caught her eye, a strange, metallic glint in the murky water near a large cypress tree. Sarah moved closer, curiosity overcoming her fatigue. Reaching into the water, her fingers closed around a small, unusually heavy rock with a distinctive bluish-silver sheen. She pulled it out, wiping away the mud to reveal what looked like a small metallic ore sample. Sarah had taken enough science classes during her nursing education to recognize that this was no ordinary stone. It had a density and color unlike anything she'd seen before. She pocketed the sample, suddenly feeling a renewed sense of purpose. What if there was something valuable here after all? The next day, instead of catching up on much-needed sleep after her night shift, Sarah drove to Riverside Community College, where her friend Dr. Elena Vasquez taught geology. Elena had always been fascinated by Sarah's stories of her grandmother's mysterious swampland, often joking that they should go searching for buried treasure together. Elena was grading papers in her cluttered office when Sarah arrived, sample in hand. "Well, if it isn't Florence Nightingale," Elena teased, pushing her glasses up her nose. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Finally decided to give up nursing and join me in the exciting world of rocks?" Sarah placed the sample on Elena's desk without ceremony. "I found this on my grandmother's property. Any idea what it might be?" Elena's smile faded as she picked up the sample, instantly registering its unusual weight. She reached for a magnifying glass and examined it closely, her expression growing increasingly serious. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked, reaching for a small tool to scratch the surface of the rock. "In the swamp, near a cypress tree," Sarah replied, watching her friend's face carefully. "Is it something special?" Elena set down the magnifying glass and looked up at Sarah with wide eyes. "Sarah, if this is what I think it is, you might want to sit down." Sarah's heart began to race as she lowered herself into the chair opposite Elena's desk. What is it?" "I can't be certain without proper testing, but this appears to be a sample containing significant amounts of rare earth elements, possibly including neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium," Elena explained, her voice hushed with excitement. "These are incredibly valuable minerals used in everything from smartphones to electric vehicles to military technology. They're called rare earths for a reason. Economically viable deposits are extremely uncommon, especially in the United States." Sarah stared at the innocuous-looking rock in disbelief. "So you're saying this little rock is valuable?" "Not just valuable, Sarah. If there's a substantial deposit on your property, we're talking potentially life-changing valuable. The U.S. currently imports more than 80% of its rare earth elements from China. A domestic source would be, well, it would be monumental." Elena paused, considering her next words carefully. "But before you get too excited, we need to confirm this with proper testing and survey the extent of the deposit. This could be a single anomalous sample." Sarah nodded, trying to process this information. Could this be what her grandmother had been referring to in her journal? Had Margaret somehow known about these minerals? "How do we do that?" "The testing, I mean. I can run some preliminary tests in our lab here, but for something this potentially significant, we'd need specialized equipment," Elena replied. "I have a colleague at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory who specializes in rare earth element identification. They use these minerals in space technology. I could send her a sample, but it would take time to get results." "Do it," Sarah said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes. If there's even a small chance my grandmother's swamp is valuable, I need to know." As Elena carefully packaged the sample for testing, Sarah felt a strange mix of hope and apprehension. If this turned out to be significant, her life would change forever. But she also knew that valuable discoveries rarely remain secret for long. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah threw herself into research about rare earth elements while continuing her demanding schedule at the hospital. She learned about their critical importance in green technology, their scarcity in North American deposits, and the geopolitical implications of their supply chain. The more she read, the more she understood the potential significance of what might lie beneath her grandmother's Swampland. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Sarah's phone rang as she was changing out of her scrubs after a particularly difficult shift, involving a multi-car accident. Elena's name flashed on the screen. "Sarah, where are you right now?" Elena's voice was tight with barely contained excitement. "Just finishing my shift at the hospital." "Why? Did you hear something?" Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "My contact at JPL just called. They've completed the analysis, and Sarah, you need to come to my office right away. This isn't something to discuss over the phone." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah drove to the college in a daze, her mind racing with possibilities. The rain had intensified, drumming on the roof of her car like an ominous countdown. By the time she reached Elena's office, she was soaked and breathless. Elena wasn't alone. A serious-looking woman in a crisp blazer stood by the window, studying a series of charts displayed on Elena's computer. She turned as Sarah entered, extending her hand. "Dr. Marianne Carter, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. You must be Sarah Jenkins." Sarah shook the woman's hand, noting her firm grip and direct gaze. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for analyzing my sample." Dr. Carter nodded, gesturing for Sarah to take a seat. "Ms. Jenkins, the sample you provided contains one of the highest concentrations of rare earth elements I've ever seen outside of a laboratory setting. We're particularly interested in the levels of neodymium, dysprosium, and europium, which are critical components in advanced technology manufacturing." Sarah glanced at Elena, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "What exactly does that mean for my grandmother's property?" "It means," Dr. Carter continued, "that NASA would be very interested in further exploration of your land. These elements are essential for our space program, and domestic sources are extremely limited. We've conducted a preliminary satellite survey of the coordinates Ms. Vasquez provided, and the spectral analysis suggests the deposit could be extensive." Elena could no longer contain herself. "Sarah, do you understand what she's saying? The mineral rights alone could be worth millions, possibly hundreds of millions, depending on the size and concentration of the deposit." Sarah felt lightheaded, gripping the edge of the desk for support. "Hundreds of millions? That can't be right." Dr. Carter's expression remained professionally neutral. "While I can't provide an exact valuation without a comprehensive ground survey, Ms. Vasquez's estimate is within reason given current market values and the preliminary data. Rare earth elements are trading at record highs due to increased demand from the tech and defense sectors. A domestic source of this apparent quality would be extraordinarily valuable." Sarah thought of her grandmother's cryptic message, "Look beneath the surface." Had she somehow known about this? Had she purchased the Swampland because of geological surveys or local legends? Or had it been pure luck, a random investment that would turn out to be her granddaughter's salvation? "What happens next?" Sarah asked, struggling to maintain her composure. "With your permission, NASA would like to send a team to conduct a comprehensive survey of the property," Dr. Carter explained. "This would include ground-penetrating radar, core sampling, and detailed analysis to determine the extent and value of the deposit. We would cover all costs, of course." Sarah nodded slowly, still processing the magnitude of this discovery. And if the survey confirms your preliminary findings? What then? Then, Ms. Jenkins, you have options, Dr. Carter replied. You could sell the mineral rights outright, enter into a joint extraction agreement with the government or private industry, or potentially even develop the site yourself with the right partnerships. But I should warn you, once news of this discovery gets out, you'll have no shortage of interested parties knocking at your door. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her Uncle Thomas. Need to talk about Grandma's swamp. Heard rumors. Call me ASAP. Sarah stared at the message in disbelief. How could he possibly know anything? She had told no one except Elena about finding the unusual rock. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that news of valuable discoveries had a way of traveling fast, even before they were confirmed. I think it's already starting, she murmured, showing Elena the message. Elena's expression darkened. You need to be careful, Sarah, very careful. If this is what we think it is, people will try to take advantage of you. Your family may suddenly develop a keen interest in that worthless Swampland they were so quick to ridicule. Dr. Carter nodded in agreement. I've seen this happen before with valuable mineral discoveries. My advice would be to secure legal representation immediately, someone specializing in mineral rights and property law. And until the survey is complete and you've decided on your course of action, discretion is your best protection. Sarah thought of her quiet life as a nurse, the long hours, the emotional toll, the modest paycheck that barely covered her student loans and living expenses. She thought of her grandmother, saving for decades on a secretary's salary, somehow acquiring a piece of land that might now be worth a fortune. And she thought of her Uncle Thomas, who had mocked that purchase for years, now suddenly interested in what lay beneath the murky waters. How soon can your team begin the survey? Sarah asked Dr. Carter, a new resolve hardening within her. We can have people on site within the week, if you approve. Do it, Sarah said firmly. And in the meantime, I'll find the best lawyer I can afford. As Sarah drove home that evening, the rain had stopped, and a brilliant sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and purple. She thought about how quickly life could change, how a single discovery could alter one's trajectory forever. Her grandmother's seemingly foolish investment might just prove to be the most prescient decision of her life. Sarah's phone rang again, Uncle Thomas, for the third time that hour. She silenced the call, focusing on the road ahead. Whatever came next, she would need to be strategic, cautious, and strong, just as her grandmother had believed she could be. The following morning, Sarah took a rare personal day from the hospital and drove to the offices of Reynolds and Baxter, a law firm specializing in property rights and natural resources. The receptionist looked surprised when Sarah asked for an appointment with a senior partner, but something in Sarah's determined expression must have convinced her to make an inquiry. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself seated across from Patricia Reynolds, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s whose reputation for handling high-profile mineral rights cases preceded her. Ms. Jenkins, what can I do for you today? Patricia asked, her pen poised over a legal pad. Sarah took a deep breath and laid out the situation, her grandmother's bequest, the discovery of the rare earth elements, NASA's interest, and her family's sudden curiosity. As she spoke, Patricia's expression shifted from polite interest to intense focus. And you've told no one else about NASA's preliminary findings? Patricia asked when Sarah had finished. Just my friend Elena, the geology professor who helped identify the sample. But somehow my uncle seems to know something's up. I've been ignoring his calls. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. Small towns have a way of nurturing rumors. Someone might have seen you with Dr. Carter, or perhaps your uncle simply noted your sudden interest in property that he believed worthless. She set down her pen and leaned forward. Ms. Jenkins, if these findings are confirmed, you're sitting on what could be the most significant rare earth element discovery in the United States. The value is not just in the minerals themselves, but in their strategic importance. Our country currently relies heavily on foreign sources for these critical elements. A domestic supply of this magnitude would have national security implications. Sarah hadn't considered this angle. So what should I do? I'm a nurse, not a mining expert or a businesswoman. First, we secure your legal position, Patricia stated firmly. I recommend setting up a limited liability company to hold the property and any future mineral rights. This provides a layer of protection for your personal assets. Second, we need to establish that your grandmothers will clearly transfer all mineral rights, along with the surface property. Third, we wait for NASA's comprehensive survey before making any decisions about extraction or partnerships. And my family? What do I tell them? Patricia's expression hardened slightly. Nothing. Absolutely nothing until we know exactly what we're dealing with and have secured your legal position. If your uncle or anyone else presses you, simply say that you're exploring conservation options for the wetland. That should buy us some time. As Sarah left the law office with a preliminary agreement for representation, she felt both relieved and overwhelmed. The simple life she had known was already slipping away, replaced by something more complex and potentially dangerous. She would need to be vigilant, shrewd, and patient, qualities her grandmother had always tried to instill in her. That evening, as Sarah settled in with a cup of tea and her grandmother's journal, seeking comfort in the familiar handwriting, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Uncle Thomas, his wife Vera, and two men she didn't recognize standing on her porch. Sarah's heart raced as she contemplated pretending not to be home. But the lights were on, and her car was clearly visible in the driveway. Steeling herself, she opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. "Uncle Thomas, it's a bit late for a visit, isn't it?" she said, striving for a neutral tone. Thomas's normally ruddy face was flushed with excitement. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk. This is Mr. Davidson and Mr. Reeves from Nexus Resource Development. They've made us an incredible offer for that Swampland Margaret left you." Sarah felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "Us? I believe Grandma left the property to me, not us." Thomas waved his hand dismissively. "Family property, Sarah. We're all Margaret's family. Besides, you don't have the resources to develop it properly. These gentlemen are prepared to offer $50,000 for land that was assessed at less than $5,000 just last year. It's a windfall." The man Thomas had introduced as Davidson stepped forward, an oily smile on his face. "Miss Jenkins, your uncle mentioned you might be hesitant. Let me assure you, this is a very generous offer for undeveloped wetland. We're only interested because it adjoins another property we've recently acquired for a nature conservation project." Sarah knew instantly that they were lying. There was no conservation project. Somehow they had gotten wind of the mineral potential. The question was, how much did they actually know? "I'm not interested in selling," she said firmly. "Grandma wanted me to have that land, and I intend to honor her wishes." Davidson's smile faltered slightly. "Perhaps you'd like some time to consider? We could increase the offer to $75,000, but I should warn you, that's well above market value. This is a one-time opportunity." Sarah looked directly at her uncle, noting the avaricious gleam in his eyes. He had never shown any interest in her welfare before. His sudden concern was transparently self-serving. "No, thank you. I'm not selling. Not now, not ever. Good night." As she closed the door on their protests, Sarah leaned against it, heart pounding. The game was now in motion, and the stakes were clearly much higher than even she had realized. If these developers were willing to offer $75,000 sight unseen, they must suspect the property was worth far more. The following day, Sarah called the hospital and requested an emergency leave of absence. Her supervisor, understanding the unusual circumstances without knowing the details, granted her 2 weeks. It was the first time in 5 years that Sarah had asked for unplanned time off. She drove straight to Patricia Reynolds' office, arriving just as the law firm opened. The receptionist, recognizing her from the previous day, immediately ushered her into Patricia's office. "They know," Sarah blurted out before even sitting down. She quickly recounted the previous night's visit from her uncle and the developers. Patricia's expression remained calm, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "This complicates things, but doesn't change our strategy. The offer they made is laughably low even for supposedly worthless Swampland. That tells me they suspect something, but don't have confirmation." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, collapsing into the chair opposite Patricia's desk. "Now we accelerate our timeline. I've already started the paperwork for your LLC. We need to move quickly to secure your mineral rights and get NASA's team on site before anyone else tries to access the property." Patricia picked up her phone. "We also need to get a security detail out there immediately. I have a company I trust for these matters." Within hours, Sarah's newly formed company, Margaret's Legacy LLC, was the official owner of the property, with Sarah as the sole member and beneficiary. Patricia had also arranged for a private security firm to patrol the perimeter of the Swampland, with strict instructions not to allow anyone access without Sarah's explicit permission. That afternoon, as Sarah was reviewing the security contract in Patricia's office, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Dr. Carter. "Miss Jenkins, we've been trying to access your property to begin the survey, but there appear to be armed guards preventing entry," Dr. Carter said, her voice tense with frustration. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Carter. That's my security team. There have been some complications," Sarah explained. "Some developers have already approached me with offers for the land. My lawyer advised securing the perimeter." There was a pause on the line. "This is moving faster than anticipated. We'll need to accelerate our timeline as well. I can have a full team there tomorrow morning, with all the necessary equipment for a comprehensive survey, if you can arrange access." Sarah looked to Patricia, who nodded affirmatively. "That would be perfect. I'll meet you there personally with my lawyer to provide access and oversee the process." When Sarah arrived at the property the next day, the transformation was already evident. A temporary security checkpoint had been established at the entrance to the dirt road, manned by two serious-looking individuals in unmarked uniforms. They checked Sarah's identification carefully before allowing her through, despite having been briefed about her arrival. Beyond the checkpoint, the previously isolated Swampland bustled with activity. Several large vehicles bearing NASA insignia had somehow navigated the treacherous road, and a team of about 15 people in specialized gear moved purposefully around the site. Dr. Carter stood near a folding table covered with maps and equipment, deep in conversation with a man in mud-spattered boots. "Ms. Jenkins," Dr. Carter called, waving Sarah and Patricia over. "Thank you for arranging such prompt access. This is Dr. Harmon, our lead geologist specializing in rare earth deposits." Dr. Harmon shook Sarah's hand with enthusiasm. "Ms. Jenkins, I've only seen preliminary data, but I must say, I haven't been this excited about a potential discovery since my work in Mongolia 8 years ago. If your grandmother's property contains what we suspect, it could rewrite the resource map of North America." Sarah felt simultaneously proud and overwhelmed. "My grandmother never mentioned anything about minerals or resources. I'm still trying to understand how she knew to buy this particular piece of land. Sometimes the most remarkable discoveries come from the most unlikely sources," Dr. Harmon replied with a smile. "We may never know if she had insider knowledge or simply extraordinary luck, but either way, her legacy could be transformative not just for you, but potentially for the country's technological future." Over the next several hours, Sarah watched in amazement as the NASA team deployed an array of sophisticated equipment across the Swampland. Ground-penetrating radar units mounted on specialized amphibious vehicles mapped the subsurface terrain. Core sampling devices extracted cylindrical sections of Earth from various depths. Portable spectrometers analyzed soil composition in real time, sending data to computers set up in a makeshift command center. By mid-afternoon, a palpable excitement had spread through the team. Dr. Carter approached Sarah and Patricia, who had been observing from a dry patch of ground near the original sample site. "Ms. Jenkins, we have preliminary results from our initial surveys," Dr. Carter announced, her professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine excitement. "The deposit appears to be significantly larger and more concentrated than we initially estimated. The rare earth elements are present in a uniquely accessible formation, likely due to ancient volcanic activity that pushed the minerals closer to the surface." "What exactly does that mean in practical terms?" Patricia asked, ever focused on the implications for her client. Dr. Harmon joined them, mud spattered up to his knees but grinning broadly. "It means, counselor, that we're looking at potentially the largest and most accessible rare earth deposit in North America. Most rare earth minerals require extensive processing to separate them from surrounding materials, but this formation has unique properties that would make extraction significantly more efficient." Sarah tried to process this information. "And the value?" Dr. Carter and Dr. Harmon exchanged glances. "Based on current market prices and our preliminary assessment of volume and concentration, we're looking at a conservative estimate of $400 million in extractable rare earth elements. Possibly considerably more once we complete a full assessment." Patricia gripped Sarah's arm as the young nurse swayed slightly. $400 million? Sarah whispered, the number almost incomprehensible. "At minimum," Dr. Harmon confirmed. "And given the strategic importance of these elements to both the technology sector and national security, the true value could be significantly higher." Sarah's mind reeled with the implications. Just days ago, she had been working double shifts to make her student loan payments, living in the modest house she had inherited from her grandmother, driving a 10-year-old car with mounting repair bills. And now, "I need to sit down," she murmured. Patricia guided her to a folding chair near the command center, her expression concerned but practical. "Sarah, this is overwhelming news, but we need to stay focused. The security concerns we discussed yesterday are now exponentially more significant. We need to move quickly to protect your interests." Sarah nodded, trying to regain her composure. "What should we do next?" "First, we need absolute confidentiality agreements from everyone involved in this survey," Patricia said, looking pointedly at Dr. Carter. "Second, we need to accelerate our protection strategy. And third, we need to consider your options carefully before word inevitably leaks out." Dr. Carter nodded in agreement. "NASA understands the sensitivity of this discovery. All personnel on site have already signed standard confidentiality agreements, but we can certainly implement additional measures given the circumstances." As they discussed next steps, one of the security guards approached rapidly. "Ms. Jenkins, there's a situation at the checkpoint. A man claiming to be your uncle is demanding access. He has several people with him, including individuals identifying themselves as representatives from the Nexus Resource Development Company and a local judge." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Judge Harrison? Older man, white hair, always wears boaties?" The guard checked his tablet. "Yes, that's the name he gave." Patricia's expression darkened. "Judge Harrison is a close friend of the Davidson family owners of Nexus. This is not a coincidence." Sarah turned to Dr. Carter. "How soon can you complete your survey?" "We've already gathered substantial data, but a comprehensive assessment would typically take at least a week," Dr. Carter replied. "We don't have a week," Patricia interjected. "If they've involved a local judge, they're likely seeking an emergency injunction or trying to challenge the property transfer. We need to secure your position immediately." Sarah felt a surge of determination replace her shock. Her grandmother had trusted her with this land for a reason. She would not let anyone take it away, not her opportunistic uncle, not corrupt local businessmen, not even a biased judge. Dr. Carter, what's the absolute minimum time you need to gather enough data to verify the value of the deposit? Sarah asked, her nursing training kicking in. Prioritize, assess, act decisively. With the equipment we have on site and working around the clock? 48 hours for a preliminary valuation that would stand up to scientific scrutiny. Dr. Carter replied after a moment of calculation. Then that's what we have. Patricia, can you hold off any legal challenges for 2 days? The lawyer's expression was grim but determined. I can try. I'll call in some favors with the state court and file for an emergency stay against any local rulings. But Sarah, you need to understand, once we do this, there's no turning back. This will become a high-profile case very quickly. Sarah thought of her grandmother's final message. Don't let anyone take it from you. With renewed resolve, she nodded. Do whatever you need to do. This was my grandmother's legacy to me, and I won't let anyone steal it. Over the next 48 hours, Sarah barely left the property. She slept in her car, ate from the NASA team's supply of energy bars and coffee, and watched as core samples were extracted and analyzed around the clock. Patricia shuttled between the site and the courthouse, filing motions and counter-motions against the increasingly aggressive legal maneuvers from Nexus Resource Development. The security team had to be doubled after several attempts by unknown individuals to access the property under cover of darkness. Local news vans began to appear at the checkpoint, turned away by the guards, but persistent in their quest for information about the sudden interest in a seemingly worthless parcel of Swampland. On the morning of the third day, as Sarah was reviewing the latest security report with the head of the protective detail, Dr. Carter approached with a tablet computer in hand. Her expression was unreadable as she asked for a moment of privacy. Inside the command tent, Dr. Carter placed the tablet on the folding table. Ms. Jenkins, we've completed our preliminary assessment. The data has been triple verified by our team and cross-checked with geological surveys from similar deposits worldwide. Sarah steeled herself, and Dr. Carter's serious expression finally broke into a smile. The deposit exceeds our most optimistic projections. Based on current market values, we estimate the extractable rare earth elements on your property to be worth approximately $430 million. The concentration levels are unprecedented for a North American deposit, and the formation's geological characteristics make it exceptionally accessible for efficient extraction. Sarah sat down heavily on a nearby chair, the magnitude of the discovery finally hitting her fully. $430 million, she repeated softly. Moreover, Dr. Carter continued, these particular rare earth elements, especially the neodymium, dysprosium, and europium, are classified as critical materials by the Department of Defense due to their essential role in advanced weapon systems and military technology. This adds a national security dimension to the discovery that significantly increases its strategic value beyond mere market price. What happens now? Sarah asked, the question that had become her mantra in recent days. Now you have options, Miss Jenkins, Dr. Carter replied. NASA would be interested in establishing a long-term partnership for research access and priority supply arrangements. The Department of Defense will certainly want to discuss strategic material allocation. And private industry, from tech giants to automotive manufacturers, will be lining up to secure supply contracts. Patricia, who had been silently taking notes, looked up. Before any of that happens, we need to secure Sarah's legal position conclusively. The motions I filed have bought us some time, but Nexus and Judge Harrison are still pushing hard for an emergency hearing. As if on cue, Sarah's phone rang a number she didn't recognize with the local area code. Hesitantly, she answered, putting it on speaker. Sarah Jenkins? A smooth male voice inquired. Yes, this is she. Ms. Jenkins, my name is Michael Harrington, CEO of Nexus Resource Development. I understand there's been some confusion regarding our interest in your property. I'd like to meet personally to clear the air and make you a new offer that I think you'll find extremely generous. Sarah glanced at Patricia, who mouthed stall silently. Mr. Harrington, this isn't a good time. I'm in the middle of some important assessments of the property. Yes, the NASA survey. Very thorough work, I'm sure, Harrington replied, a note of smugness in his voice confirming Sarah's fears that information was leaking somehow. But perhaps you're not fully aware of the complexities involved in mineral extraction, especially in environmentally sensitive areas like wetlands. The permitting process alone can take years, not to mention the capital requirements for development. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Harrington, but I'm not interested in selling. Ms. Jenkins, Harrington's voice hardened slightly, I'm prepared to offer you $20 million for the property and all associated mineral rights. Cash. Immediate transfer. No waiting for permits, no development risks, no legal battles. $20 million for land that was valued at less than $5,000 just last week. I suggest you consider this opportunity carefully. Sarah felt a momentary temptation. $20 million would change her life completely, pay off her student loans, allow her to travel, set up charitable foundations, never worry about money again. But it was a fraction of the property's true value, and accepting it would mean betraying her grandmother's trust. Mr. Harrington, I appreciate your offer, but as I said, I'm not interested in selling. Her voice was stronger now, conviction replacing hesitation. There was a pause on the line. Ms. Jenkins, I don't think you understand the situation. Judge Harrison has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow regarding certain irregularities in your grandmother's property acquisition. It would be unfortunate if legal complications arose that might tie up that land for years in probate. Patricia had heard enough. She leaned toward the phone. Mr. Harrington, this is Patricia Reynolds, Ms. Jenkins' attorney. Any further attempts to contact my client directly will be considered harassment. Any allegations regarding the property's acquisition should be directed to my office. And be advised that we have filed a formal complaint with the State Bar Association regarding Judge Harrison's apparent conflict of interest in this matter. There was another pause, longer this time. I see. Please inform Ms. Jenkins that my offer will remain open for 24 hours. After that, we will pursue all available legal remedies regarding the property dispute. The line went dead. Patricia turned to Sarah. $20 million is a desperation offer. They know the property's worth far more, but they're hoping you'll take the immediate payday rather than fight. I won't sell, Sarah said firmly. Not to them, not after these tactics. My grandmother held onto this land for decades, believing in its value when everyone else mocked her. I won't betray that faith for a fraction of what it's worth. Dr. Carter, who had been listening silently, spoke up. There is another option you might consider. The federal government has emergency acquisition powers for resources deemed critical to national security. It would be an unusual application of those powers, but given the strategic importance of these particular rare earth elements, it could provide immediate protection against these local legal maneuvers. Patricia considered this thoughtfully. A federal intervention would supersede local jurisdiction. It could be an elegant solution, assuming the government offers fair market value. I can make some calls, Dr. Carter offered. But I should warn you, once the federal government becomes officially involved, this becomes public knowledge. The media attention will be substantial. Sarah thought of her quiet life as a nurse, the privacy, the simple routines, the satisfaction of helping patients through their most vulnerable moments. That life would be gone, regardless of which path she chose. But she could honor her grandmother's legacy, secure her own future, and potentially contribute to something larger than herself. Make the calls, Sarah decided. But I want guarantees fair market value based on independent assessments, not just government valuation. And I want a role in how the resources are developed. This land was my grandmother's gift to me. I won't simply hand it over without ensuring her vision is respected." Dr. Carter nodded with new respect in her eyes. "I'll see what I can arrange. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare yourself for what comes next. Once this story breaks, your life will change irrevocably." As Sarah stepped out of the command tent into the fading afternoon light, she gazed across the swampland that had once seemed so worthless. The murky water reflected the golden hues of sunset, and the ancient cypress trees stood sentinel like silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. Somewhere beneath this unassuming landscape lay a treasure that could transform not just her life, but potentially the technological future of an entire nation. Her phone buzzed with another text message from Uncle Thomas. "Be reasonable, Sarah. You're making powerful enemies. Let's talk about this as family." Sarah didn't bother to respond. Instead, she opened her grandmother's journal to the final entry. "Don't let anyone take it from you." "I won't, Grandma," she whispered to the evening breeze. "I promise." The morning dawned crisp and clear as Sarah stood at the edge of her grandmother's property, watching a convoy of government vehicles navigate the now improved access road. In the 5 days since Dr. Carter had made her calls, the transformation had been remarkable. What had once been an isolated, mosquito-infested swampland was now the center of intense national interest. A temporary headquarters had been established at the site, a cluster of prefabricated buildings housing laboratories, security operations, and administrative offices. The perimeter was now secured by federal agents rather than private security, and surveillance drones occasionally hummed overhead, monitoring for unauthorized activity. Sarah watched as a black SUV with government plates pulled up, and a distinguished-looking man in his 60s emerged. Followed by several aides, Dr. Carter approached from the command center to greet them. "Ms. Jenkins," Dr. Carter called, waving Sarah over. "I'd like you to meet Secretary Wilson from the Department of Energy." Sarah smoothed her simple blouse. She'd abandoned her nursing scrubs for business casual attire in recent days and walked over to join them. "Secretary Wilson, this is Sarah Jenkins, the property owner," Dr. Carter said. The secretary extended his hand with a warm smile. "Ms. Jenkins, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've been briefed on your remarkable discovery, and I must say, your grandmother's foresight was extraordinary." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Secretary, though I'm still not entirely convinced it was foresight rather than fortunate coincidence. Sometimes the most significant discoveries in history come from unexpected places," the secretary replied. "The government is extremely interested in developing this resource responsibly and efficiently. As you know, our dependence on foreign sources for these critical materials has been a strategic vulnerability for too long." Patricia Reynolds emerged from one of the buildings and joined them, clipboard in hand. "Secretary Wilson, I'm Patricia Reynolds, Ms. Jenkins' attorney. I believe your office has reviewed our proposed terms?" The secretary nodded, his expression becoming more businesslike. "Yes, and I'm prepared to discuss them today. Shall we?" He gestured toward the main building. Inside a conference room that hadn't existed a week ago, Sarah sat beside Patricia as Secretary Wilson and his team presented the government's proposal. The terms were substantially more favorable than Sarah had dared to hope. $410 million for mineral rights while allowing her to retain ownership of the land itself, a consulting role in the extraction planning to ensure environmental considerations were respected, and a small but meaningful percentage of any future discoveries on the property. "These terms are quite generous," Patricia noted, reviewing the document carefully. "The strategic value of this discovery justifies the investment," Secretary Wilson replied. "More importantly, we want this to be a collaborative partnership, not an adversarial takeover. Ms. Jenkins' cooperation and goodwill are important to us." Sarah felt a surge of relief and gratitude. The nightmare scenario of prolonged legal battles with Nexus and her uncle seemed to be evaporating in the face of federal intervention. "When would extraction begin?" she asked. "We're proposing a phased approach," one of the secretary's aides explained, unfolding a detailed map across the table. "Initial operations would focus on the highest concentration areas identified in the NASA survey, with careful attention to minimizing environmental impact. Full-scale operations would be approximately 18 months away, following the necessary environmental impact studies and infrastructure development." "And what happens to the swamp itself?" Sarah asked, thinking of her grandmother's apparent affection for the seemingly inhospitable landscape. "That's where your input would be particularly valuable," Secretary Wilson said. "Our engineers believe we can develop the resources while preserving much of the natural wetland ecosystem. In fact, part of our proposal includes establishing a portion of the property as a protected wildlife sanctuary in your grandmother's name." Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes at this unexpected gesture. Margaret Jenkins had been a modest woman who never sought recognition or acclaim, but a wildlife sanctuary named in her honor seemed a fitting tribute to her unusual investment. "I would like that very much," she said softly. As they continued discussing the details, a commotion outside caught their attention. Through the window, Sarah could see several news vans arriving at the perimeter checkpoint, along with what appeared to be a crowd of local residents. Secretary Wilson sighed. "It appears word has finally reached the media. We had hoped to finalize our agreement before this became a public spectacle." One of the federal agents entered the conference room. "Sir, there's a situation developing at the perimeter. Local news crews are requesting access for a statement, and a group identifying themselves as the Jenkins family is demanding to speak with Ms. Jenkins. They're accompanied by representatives from Nexus Resource Development and what appears to be a local judicial officer." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "My uncle and Judge Harrison," she murmured. Patricia placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's arm. "They have no jurisdiction here now. The federal government's national security interest supersedes any local claims or proceedings." Secretary Wilson stood. "Ms. Jenkins, I suggest we accelerate our timeline. If you're comfortable with the terms we've proposed, we can proceed with the preliminary agreement today, which would immediately establish federal protection of the resource. Your attorney can review the final documentation at her leisure before the formal transfer." Sarah looked at Patricia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Let's do it," Sarah decided. Within the hour, Sarah had signed the preliminary agreement, officially partnering with the Department of Energy to develop what was already being called the most significant rare earth element discovery in North American history. The terms ensured her financial security for generations while preserving her connection to the land her grandmother had entrusted to her. As the paperwork was being processed, Secretary Wilson suggested that Sarah might want to make a brief statement to the assembled media. "It would help control the narrative," he explained. "Otherwise, speculation will run rampant, and others may try to claim credit or spread misinformation." Sarah hesitated. She had never sought the spotlight and had always been more comfortable caring for patients than addressing cameras. But she thought of her grandmother, who had faced years of ridicule for her investment in this supposedly worthless swampland. Margaret Jenkins deserved to have her wisdom acknowledged publicly. "I'll speak to them," Sarah agreed. "But I want my uncle and the Nexus representatives to be present as well." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure that's wise?" "They were quick to mock when they thought the land was worthless," Sarah replied with quiet determination. "They should be present to hear the truth." A small stage was hastily assembled near the property entrance, with a podium bearing the Department of Energy seal. By the time Sarah emerged, flanked by Secretary Wilson and Patricia, the crowd had grown substantially. Local and national news crews jostled for position, cameras trained on the podium. At the front of the crowd, Sarah could see Uncle Thomas, his face flushed with anger, standing beside the men from Nexus Resource Development and Judge Harrison. As Sarah approached the podium, a hush fell over the assembled reporters and onlookers. She took a deep breath, thinking of all the changes the past 2 weeks had brought, from overworked nurse to mineral rights multimillionaire, from anonymous caregiver to the focus of national attention. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. 2 weeks ago, I was working double shifts as a trauma nurse at Riverside General Hospital, just as I have for the past 5 years. Today, I'm addressing you as the owner of what scientists have confirmed is one of the largest and most valuable rare earth element deposits ever discovered in the United States." A murmur ran through the crowd as reporters furiously took notes. "This property was left to me by my grandmother, Margaret Jenkins, who purchased it over 30 years ago when it was considered worthless swampland. Throughout her life, she was ridiculed for this investment, told she had wasted her hard-earned savings on mosquito-infested wilderness that would never have any value." Sarah's gaze found her uncle in the crowd, his expression now uncertain as he realized the direction her remarks were taking. "My grandmother was not a geologist or a mining expert. She was a school secretary who worked for 4 decades, raising me after my parents' death, and somehow finding the foresight, or perhaps the extraordinary good fortune, to acquire this particular piece of land. In her final message to me, she wrote, 'The land is not what it seems. Look beneath the surface.'" Sarah paused, emotion briefly overcoming her. When she continued, her voice was stronger, infused with pride. "Today, I am announcing that I have entered into an agreement with the United States Department of Energy to develop the rare earth resources on this property, resources valued at approximately $430 million. These critical materials will strengthen our national security, support our technological innovation, and reduce our dependence on foreign sources." The crowd erupted in exclamations and questions. Sarah raised a hand for silence. "I would like to acknowledge several people who have been instrumental in this discovery and its verification. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who first identified the unusual sample I found on the property, Dr. Marianne Carter and the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory team, who conducted the comprehensive survey confirming the deposit's extent and value, Secretary Wilson and the Department of Energy, who recognized the strategic importance of this discovery and moved quickly to secure it for the benefit of our nation." Sarah paused, gathering herself for what came next. "I would also like to acknowledge those who attempted to acquire this property for a fraction of its value once rumors of its potential began to circulate. My uncle Thomas Jenkins, who just 1 week ago was part of a group offering me $50,000 for land now valued at nearly $500 million. The executives of Nexus Resource Development, who subsequently increased their offer to $20 million, while simultaneously filing dubious legal challenges to my ownership." Camera flashes illuminated Uncle Thomas's face, now pale with shock and embarrassment. The Nexus representatives shifted uncomfortably, avoiding the cameras now turned in their direction. Their actions remind us that opportunity often reveals character. While some saw a chance to take advantage of a nurse who they assumed wouldn't know any better, others like Secretary Wilson and his team saw an opportunity for partnership that benefits all parties while serving the greater good. Sarah's gaze swept across the assembled reporters, no longer nervous but filled with a sense of purpose. "As part of our agreement, a portion of this property will be designated as the Margaret Jenkins Wildlife Sanctuary, preserving the unique wetland ecosystem while allowing responsible development of the resources beneath. This honors my grandmother's connection to this land while ensuring it continues to serve both nature and humanity." Sarah stepped back from the podium, indicating she was finished. Secretary Wilson moved forward to answer the barrage of technical questions from reporters, while Patricia guided Sarah through the crowd toward the waiting government vehicles. As they passed her uncle, Sarah paused. Thomas's expression was a complex mixture of shame, anger, and calculation, no doubt, already plotting how to claim some familial entitlement to her newfound wealth. "Sarah, honey," he began, his tone conciliatory, "we should talk as a family about—" "We're not family," Sarah interrupted quietly so only he could hear. "Family doesn't try to cheat family. Grandmother knew exactly what kind of man you are, which is why she left the land to me alone." She continued walking, leaving him speechless for perhaps the first time in his life. Back at the command center, Dr. Carter was waiting with news. "The preliminary extraction plans are ready for your review," she told Sarah. "And there's something else. The deeper core samples have revealed an additional deposit of europium that wasn't detected in our initial survey. It could increase the overall value by another 15 to 20%. Sarah shook her head in amazement. "My grandmother's gift just keeps on giving." "Speaking of your grandmother," Dr. Carter said, "one of our researchers found something interesting while reviewing historical geological surveys of this area." She handed Sarah a faded document. "This is a government survey from 1972, conducted as part of a nationwide resource assessment. It mentions unusual mineral signatures in this region that warranted further investigation, but the project was apparently discontinued due to budget cuts." Sarah studied the document, noting that it had been published in a scientific journal that would have been available in the local library where her grandmother had worked part-time after retirement. "So she might have actually known," Sarah murmured. "All those years of being mocked for her foolish investment, and she might have been playing the longest of long games." Patricia smiled. "It would explain her cryptic journal entries about the investment and my legacy to Sarah. She may not have known exactly what minerals were present or their potential value, but she suspected something that others had overlooked." Margaret Jenkins, Secretary Wilson mused, school secretary, devoted grandmother, and perhaps one of the most patient and far-sighted investors in history. Her story will inspire generations of young scientists and entrepreneurs. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found a quiet moment to slip away from the bustle of activity. She walked to the edge of the swampland, to the cypress tree where she had found the first unusual rock that had started this extraordinary journey. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the water, transforming the seemingly unremarkable landscape into something magical. She removed her grandmother's journal from her bag and turned to the final entry once more. "Don't let anyone take it from you. Love always, Grandma Margaret." "I kept my promise, Grandma," Sarah whispered to the gentle evening breeze. "And now your legacy will help countless people, not just me, but everyone who benefits from the resources you somehow knew were here." In the fading light, Sarah could almost imagine her grandmother standing beside her, proud and satisfied that her faith in this unlikely piece of land and in her granddaughter had been so thoroughly vindicated. A text message from Alana Vasquez illuminated Sarah's phone. "Just saw you on national news. From swamp to scientific sensation in 2 weeks. Let's celebrate when things calm down. So proud of you, and your grandmother would be too." Sarah smiled as she tucked the phone away. Her life had transformed completely from dedicated nurse living paycheck to a woman of substantial means and newfound influence. The challenges ahead would be different, but no less demanding, managing her sudden wealth responsibly, ensuring the environmental protection of her grandmother's land, navigating the public attention that would now follow her. But in this moment of quiet reflection, Sarah felt equal to whatever came next. Her grandmother had trusted her with this extraordinary legacy, not just because of blood ties, but because she had recognized in Sarah the same qualities that had guided her own life: patience, determination, and the wisdom to look beneath the surface of things to find their true value. As darkness fell over the swampland that had changed everything, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and to her grandmother's memory. She would use this unexpected gift not just for personal comfort, but to create her own legacy of compassion and foresight, a legacy worthy of the remarkable woman who had made it all possible. The stars began to appear overhead, reflected in the dark waters of the swamp, as Sarah turned toward the lights of the command center. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new challenges, and new opportunities. But tonight, in this moment of transition between her old life and whatever remarkable future awaited, she allowed herself to simply feel grateful for the extraordinary gift her grandmother had left her, not just the valuable minerals beneath the swamp, but the far more precious lessons about patience, faith, and looking beyond appearances to find true worth. With renewed purpose in her step, Sarah walked back toward the lights of the command center, where Secretary Wilson, Patricia, and Dr. Carter were waiting to continue planning the responsible development of what the media was already calling the Jenkins discovery. The name brought a smile to Sarah's lips. Her grandmother, who had lived her entire life in modest obscurity, would now be remembered in scientific journals and history books, the school secretary, whose unusual investment had transformed the resource landscape of a nation. The modest house where Sarah had grown up under her grandmother's care now seemed a world away, though it had only been 2 weeks since she had sat there reading the journal by lamplight, trying to decipher her grandmother's cryptic final message. In that short time, she had discovered strengths within herself she hadn't known existed, the ability to stand firm against pressure, to navigate complex negotiations, to speak confidently before national media. These were capacities her grandmother had always seen in her, even when Sarah herself hadn't recognized them. Margaret Jenkins had prepared her granddaughter not just with the inheritance of valuable land, but with the values and character needed to protect and maximize that inheritance. As Sarah reached the command center, Secretary Wilson looked up from the maps and documents spread before him. Ms. Jenkins, we were just discussing the environmental protection measures for the sanctuary area. Your input would be valuable. Sarah joined them at the table, feeling not like an overwhelmed nurse thrust into extraordinary circumstances, but like a woman coming into her own ready to honor her grandmother's legacy while creating something new and meaningful of her own. Let's make sure we get this right, she said with quiet confidence, for grandmother and for all the generations who will benefit from what she discovered. Outside, the swamp lay silent under the stars, its secret riches no longer hidden, its true value finally recognized, much like the quiet wisdom of the woman who had seen its potential all those years ago, when everyone else had seen only worthless mosquito-infested wetland. In that moment, Sarah understood that the greatest inheritance her grandmother had left her wasn't the minerals beneath the swamp, but the wisdom to recognize value where others saw only obstacles, and the courage to protect that value against all challenges. It was a legacy far more precious than rare earth elements, and one she intended to honor with every decision she made going forward. 2 years later, Sarah stood at the edge of the newly dedicated Margaret Jenkins Wildlife Sanctuary, watching as children from the local elementary school released rescued butterflies into the pristine wetland habitat. The transformation of the property had exceeded even her most optimistic expectations. Where once there had been an inaccessible swamp, there was now a carefully designed nature reserve with elevated boardwalks, educational displays, and a research center dedicated to wetland ecology. Ms. Jenkins, they're ready for you at the extraction facility, her assistant, Marcus, said quietly, approaching from behind. Sarah nodded, giving the children one last smile before following Marcus to the waiting electric cart. As they glided silently along the solar-powered path that connected the sanctuary to the extraction facility, she marveled at how seamlessly the two operations coexisted. The rare earth extraction took place almost entirely underground, with minimal surface disruption and state-of-the-art pollution controls that exceeded federal requirements. The cart crested a small hill, revealing the extraction facility, a marvel of modern engineering that bore little resemblance to traditional mining operations. The complex featured living walls of native plants that helped filter the air, and its operations were powered entirely by renewable energy sources. Secretary Wilson had been true to his word about developing the resources responsibly, and Sarah had been an active participant in every aspect of the design. Inside the main building, a group of international dignitaries waited in the conference room. The United States had just signed historic agreements with key allies to share the rare earth elements from the Jenkins deposit, reducing global dependence on less stable sources and strengthening diplomatic ties in the process. There she is, Secretary Wilson, now in his final months before retirement, announced as Sarah entered. The woman who made all this possible. Sarah smiled modestly as she joined the group. My grandmother made it possible. I'm just the caretaker of her legacy. The ambassador from Japan bowed slightly. Ms. Jenkins, your partnership with our technology sector has allowed for significant advances in renewable energy storage. The new generation of batteries using elements from your deposit will help us achieve our carbon reduction goals years ahead of schedule. And our defense systems are no longer vulnerable to supply chain disruptions, added the German defense minister. The security implications cannot be overstated. After the formal ceremonies concluded, Sarah excused herself from the reception that followed. Today was a significant anniversary, 2 years since the initial discovery, and she had a personal tradition to maintain. She drove her electric vehicle, a modest model, despite her wealth, to Riverside General Hospital, where she had once worked endless shifts as a trauma nurse. Though she no longer practiced nursing full-time, she had maintained her license and still volunteered 1 day a week in the community clinic she had founded with part of her new wealth. The main entrance to the hospital now featured a new wing, the Margaret Jenkins Center for Medical Education, which provided full scholarships to promising nursing students from disadvantaged backgrounds. It was one of many ways Sarah had chosen to honor her grandmother's memory. In the hospital garden, Sarah met with Ilana Vasquez, the geology professor whose initial identification of the rare earth sample had set everything in motion. Over the past 2 years, their friendship had deepened, with Elena serving as a trusted advisor on both the scientific aspects of the mineral extraction and the educational programs now offered at the research center. Happy anniversary, Elena said, handing Sarah a small gift box. 2 years since you brought me that muddy rock and changed both our lives. Sarah opened the box to find a beautiful pendant, a small piece of the original rare earth sample she had discovered, now polished and set in silver. Elena, it's perfect, Sarah whispered, immediately putting it on. A little reminder of how one discovery can change everything, Elena replied. Not just the minerals, but what you've done with that opportunity. What Sarah had done with the opportunity had indeed been remarkable. Beyond the wildlife sanctuary and medical center, she had established the Jenkins Foundation, dedicated to 3 main causes: environmental conservation, healthcare accessibility, and educational opportunities for women in STEM fields. The foundation now supported projects across the country, with a particular focus on rural and underserved communities, like the one where Sarah and her grandmother had lived. Have you heard from your uncle lately? Elena asked as they strolled through the garden. Sarah shook her head. Not since the court dismissed his 3rd attempt to claim a share of the estate. I think his lawyers finally convinced him it was a lost cause. She paused, looking up at the blue sky. In a way, I feel sorry for him. He's so consumed with what he thinks he's entitled to that he can't see what he already has. Unlike someone else I know, Elena said warmly. After their visit, Sarah drove to the small cemetery where her grandmother was buried. The modest headstone had been her choice, despite offers from the Department of Energy to create a more elaborate monument. Margaret Jenkins had never sought recognition in life. Sarah felt she wouldn't have wanted it in death either. She placed a small bouquet of wildflowers from the sanctuary beside the headstone and sat on the bench she had installed for her frequent visits. Hi, Grandma, she said softly. It's been quite a year. The sanctuary is thriving. We've documented 32 bird species nesting there now, including the wood storks you used to point out to me when we drive past wetlands. The extraction operation is exceeding projections while maintaining all our environmental standards. And the foundation has funded 15 new community health clinics in rural areas. Sarah often came here to reflect on major decisions, finding that articulating them to her grandmother's memory helped clarify her thinking. Today, she had a particularly significant development to share. "I've been offered a position on the President's Council on Critical Resources," she continued. "It would mean dividing my time between here and Washington, advising on national policy regarding rare earth elements and other strategic materials. They want someone who understands both the scientific importance and the human impact of resource development. Someone who can help ensure that other communities benefit from their natural resources rather than being exploited." A gentle breeze rustled the flowers beside the headstone, and Sarah smiled, choosing to interpret it as her grandmother's approval. "I think I'm going to accept. It's a chance to influence policy at the highest level, to make sure that what happened here, the balance of development and conservation, the benefits flowing to local communities, becomes the standard rather than the exception." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. From struggling nurse to influential philanthropist, from anonymous caregiver to nationally recognized advocate for responsible resource development, the transformation still sometimes felt surreal. Yet through it all, she had maintained the core values her grandmother had instilled in her: compassion for others, respect for the natural world, and the wisdom to look beneath the surface to find true value. Her wealth had changed her circumstances but not her character, something she knew would have made her grandmother proud. The following morning, Sarah met with Patricia Reynolds, who had transitioned from her attorney to the legal director of the Jenkins Foundation. They were reviewing plans for the foundation's newest initiative, a program to identify and support rural communities sitting on potentially valuable resources, helping them navigate the complex legal and scientific landscape to ensure they benefited fairly from any development. "The first pilot project is ready to launch in Appalachia," Patricia explained, spreading maps across Sarah's desk. "Initial geological surveys suggest significant lithium deposits that could be crucial for battery production. The community there has been economically depressed since the coal mines closed 15 years ago. And they have no idea what might be beneath their feet," Sarah mused, studying the terrain. "Just like another community we know," Patricia replied with a smile. "But this time, they'll have expert guidance from the beginning. Your foundation will fund the preliminary surveys, legal support, and community education. If the deposits prove viable, you'll help them negotiate with developers from a position of knowledge and strength." Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction at this evolution of her grandmother's legacy. What had begun as a personal inheritance was now becoming a model that could benefit countless other communities, potentially transforming the relationship between resource extraction, environmental protection, and local prosperity. "We'll need to be careful about publicity until the surveys are complete," Sarah cautioned. "We don't want speculators swooping in before the community is properly organized and informed." Patricia nodded in agreement. "We've already secured confidentiality agreements from everyone involved. The foundation's involvement won't be announced until the community leaders are ready." As they continued planning, Sarah's phone chimed with a news alert. The headline caused her to pause in surprise: "Nexus Resource Development files for bankruptcy amid fraud investigations." She quickly scanned the article, learning that Michael Harrington, the CEO who had tried to pressure her into selling her property for a fraction of its value, was now facing federal charges for defrauding investors. Judge Harrison, who had attempted to help Nexus acquire her land through dubious legal maneuvers, had been forced to resign after an ethics investigation revealed numerous conflicts of interest in his rulings. Sarah felt no pleasure in their downfall, only a sense of justice served. Their short-sighted greed had ultimately been their undoing, while her grandmother's patience and foresight had created a legacy of lasting value. Later that afternoon, Sarah visited the community clinic she had founded, spending a few hours doing what had once been her full-time profession, caring for patients who had limited access to health care. Despite her wealth and influence, these hours of direct service remained among the most fulfilling of her week. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your blood pressure is much improved," Sarah told an elderly patient, recording the numbers in her chart. "The new medication seems to be working well." "It's not just the medicine, Ms. Jenkins," Mrs. Rodriguez replied with a warm smile. "It's knowing I can come here without worrying about bills. Before your clinic opened, I was choosing between medicine and groceries some months." Such moments reinforced Sarah's conviction that her wealth came with responsibility, not just to manage it wisely, but to use it in ways that created tangible benefits for others. The rare earth elements beneath her grandmother's Swampland had brought her personal fortune, but their true value lay in how that fortune was deployed. That evening, as she prepared for an important conference call with international partners about the next phase of extraction operations, Sarah paused to look at a framed photograph on her desk. It showed her grandmother standing on the edge of the Swampland shortly after purchasing it, looking out over the seemingly worthless expanse with an enigmatic smile. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Sarah murmured to the image. "Not just about what was beneath the surface, but about what I could become when faced with the challenge of protecting it." The conference call included scientists and officials from 3 continents, all working together on technologies that would use the rare earth elements from the Jenkins deposit to advance renewable energy, medical imaging, and telecommunications. As Sarah listened to their reports of breakthroughs and innovations made possible by the steady supply of these critical materials, she felt a profound connection to something larger than herself, a global web of progress and possibility that had its humble beginnings in a swamp that everyone else had dismissed as worthless. When the call concluded, Sarah stepped out onto the balcony of her office, which overlooked both the extraction facility and the wildlife sanctuary. The contrast between the two operations, one harvesting minerals from deep underground, the other protecting the delicate ecosystem on the surface, embodied the balance she had insisted on from the beginning. The setting sun illuminated the scene in golden light, reminiscent of that first evening when she had explored her inheritance and found the unusual rock that had changed everything. In the distance, she could see a school group on one of the sanctuary's elevated boardwalks, the children pointing excitedly at something in the water, probably one of the alligators that had become minor celebrities among local wildlife enthusiasts. Sarah's phone rang, the secure line used only for matters of highest importance. It was the President's Chief of Staff, confirming her appointment to the Council on Critical Resources and requesting her presence at the White House for the formal announcement the following week. "The President specifically mentioned your unique perspective," the Chief of Staff explained. "Someone who understands both the technical aspects of resource development and the human element, how these decisions affect real communities and individual lives." As she accepted the invitation, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From a small-town nurse struggling with student loans to a nationally recognized expert advising the president, all because her grandmother had seen value where others saw only worthless swampland. The true lesson of Margaret Jenkins' legacy, Sarah realized, wasn't just about recognizing hidden value in land or minerals. It was about recognizing the hidden potential in people, including oneself. Her grandmother had believed in her ability to handle this inheritance wisely long before Sarah had recognized that capacity within herself. Now, as she prepared to take on a role of national significance, Sarah carried that lesson forward, looking beneath the surface of communities and individuals to find the untapped potential, the hidden strengths, the overlooked opportunities that others might dismiss or devalue. The following morning, as Sarah prepared to board her foundation's modest private plane for Washington, she made one final stop at her grandmother's grave. The early light filtered through the trees, creating patterns of shadow and illumination across the simple headstone. "I'm headed to Washington, Grandma," she said quietly, "to help make sure other communities can benefit from their resources the way we have. To help create policies that balance development with protection, profit with purpose." She paused, touching the pendant Elena had given her, which she now wore daily. "You taught me to look beneath the surface. And that's exactly what I'll be doing, helping others see the deeper value in both our natural resources and our human communities." As she turned to leave, Sarah noticed a small wildflower growing beside the headstone, a rare variety that she had recently learned was unique to the ecosystem of her grandmother's Swampland. Somehow, a seed had made its way here, taking root and thriving in this new location, just as her grandmother's legacy had expanded far beyond its origins. It seemed a fitting symbol for the journey ahead, taking the wisdom gleaned from one small patch of seemingly worthless swampland and helping it take root across the nation, transforming not just landscapes but lives in the process. With renewed purpose, Sarah headed toward her waiting transportation, ready to bring her grandmother's lesson of looking beneath the surface to a national stage. The nurse who had once been mocked for inheriting worthless swampland was now a respected voice in shaping how America utilized its most critical resources not just for profit, but for the greater good of communities and the environment alike. And as her plane lifted off, carrying her toward this new chapter of influence and responsibility, Sarah knew that the most valuable discovery hadn't been the rare earth elements beneath the swamp. It had been the discovery of her own capacity to transform unexpected inheritance into meaningful legacy, a discovery that would continue to yield returns far more precious than any mineral wealth for generations to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe.